She trusted the nanny with her child until the hidden camera exposed the truth. She wasn't supposed to check the footage that day. She didn't even know the tiny blinking light in the corner had captured anything at all. But one tap on her phone and her entire world cracked open. There, in her own living room, the woman she hired, the woman she fed, the woman she trusted with her only child, leaned over the baby with a darkness she had never seen before. What the nanny did next made her blood freeze. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't frustration. It was deliberate. She felt her knees weaken as she watched. Her hands shook. Her breath broke in her throat. Because betrayal from a stranger is painful, but betrayal from someone you trusted with your child? That is unforgivable. Now she faces a choice no mother should ever face. Confront the woman who betrayed her, or gather the evidence quietly and expose a truth that will destroy everything she thought she knew. Either way, someone's life is about to change forever. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ocean of Tales. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe on this channel. We will be notifying you when we drop a new video. Don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. A soft vibration from her phone pulled her attention, but she barely looked up at first, assuming it was another email or a grocery reminder she'd forgotten again. Yet something made her swipe down anyway, a tiny instinct tugging at her chest like an invisible hand. When she tapped the notification from the baby monitor app, the screen lit up brighter than the room, washing her face in a cold, sterile glow. And in that moment, before the footage even loaded, she felt a strange heaviness forming in her chest, as if her body sensed danger before her mind did. The video opened in slow, glitchy frames, each second stretching longer than it should, pulling her deeper into a quiet dread she didn't yet understand. She leaned closer, squinting, trying to steady her breathing as the familiar living room came into view, the playmat, the blankets, the soft toys she arranged that morning. Nothing seemed wrong at first, yet something about the stillness felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain. She dragged her thumb across the timeline, hoping clarity would come, but instead the camera flickered, revealing a shadow that made her heart stumble. The nanny stepped into frame with a calmness so unnatural it made the mother's stomach twist. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost too controlled, as if she knew she wasn't alone. The baby lay still on the mat, tiny chest rising and falling, completely unaware of the danger standing inches away. The mother felt her throat tighten as she watched the nanny lean down, not with tenderness, not with care, but with a cold focus that didn't belong anywhere near a child. The air around the mother thickened as she realized this wasn't normal. Something was terribly off. A sudden motion snapped her focus. The nanny's hand moved, not quick, but firm, the kind of grip that shouldn't exist around something so delicate. The mother's breath hitched, her fingers freezing midair as if her entire body rejected what her eyes were seeing. She replayed the moment 3 times, hoping she misinterpreted it, hoping the angle distorted things, hoping her mind exaggerated the danger. But each replay confirmed the same thing, a roughness no nanny should ever have. Her pulse began to pound in her ears, a warning drum she could no longer ignore. A cold rush swept through her body, the kind that starts at the spine and spreads outward, hollowing everything it touches. She pressed the phone closer, her hands trembling uncontrollably as the nanny's expression shifted on screen, an expression she had never seen in real life. It wasn't frustration or exhaustion. It was darker, sharper, a look that didn't belong on anyone trusted with a child. Her lips parted in disbelief as the room around her blurred. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't accidental. This was deliberate intent wrapped in silence. Her knees weakened, forcing her to reach for the edge of the table just to stay upright. The footage continued playing, exposing more than she ever wanted to know, each second peeling away the illusion of safety she spent months building. She wanted to look away, but her eyes stayed glued to the screen, locked in a battle between denial and terror. The baby's soft whimper in the footage stabbed through her chest like a blade. She hadn't heard it in real time. She didn't know she'd missed it. And now she wondered what else she had missed. She paused the footage, but couldn't move, frozen in that terrifying space between realization and action. The image on her screen, the nanny hovering, the child vulnerable, felt like a scar being carved into her memory. Her heartbeat throbbed in her ears as the world around her dimmed. She suddenly understood why some truths arrive like earthquakes, because they don't just shake your home, they split your reality open. And as she stood there trembling, one question rose above all others, wrapping itself around her throat. If this was just one clip, what else would she discover? The day the nanny first walked into her life, everything felt like relief wrapped in human form. The house had been drowning in baby cries, half-eaten meals, unanswered emails, and guilt that clung to her like a second skin. When the door opened and that young woman stepped in with a soft smile and steady eyes, it felt like the room finally exhaled. Her clothes were simple, her hands folded politely, her voice measured and calm. In that moment, the mother didn't see a stranger. She saw a lifeline she was desperate enough to grab. The house smelled of baby lotion and burnt toast that morning, a familiar chaos she had learned to survive, not control. She had been running on 3 hours of broken sleep, hair tied up in a rushed bun, shirt stained with milk she hadn't noticed. As she led the nanny through the living room, pointing out toys, bottles, routines, her mind whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Finally, someone to help, someone to trust. Someone who might give her back pieces of herself she thought motherhood had permanently swallowed. The nanny moved through the space with a calm ease, her eyes scanning the baby cot, the changing table, the framed family pictures on the wall. She nodded at every instruction, every explanation, hands occasionally brushing over a toy or blanket with practiced familiarity. There was something soothing about her pace, the way she didn't rush or fidget. To a tired mother whose nerves had been stretched thin, that calm felt like medicine. She mistook that stillness for kindness, unaware it might also be the perfect cover for something she couldn't yet see. The first week felt like stepping into a new kind of life. Mornings were less frantic. The baby was always changed, fed, and resting when she returned from quick errands. The nanny seemed to anticipate needs before they were spoken. Warming bottles, folding laundry, wiping counters without being asked. Friends praised her luck over the phone as she described how quickly the nanny fit in. She started leaving longer instructions, trusting that everything would be done. That trust became a soft pillow she rested her tired heart on, not realizing it might also be a trap. Little rituals began forming without her noticing. The nanny humming softly while pacing the living room. The baby quieting faster in her arms than in anyone else's. The mother watching from the doorway, feeling a strange blend of gratitude and insecurity as she realized how easily her child responded to someone else's touch. She told herself this was good, healthy even. Children needed a village. She ignored the tiny sting inside her when the baby fussed less in the nanny's arms. That sting, small but real, was the first sign something didn't sit right. As weeks turned into months, the nanny became part of the house's rhythm. Her footsteps on the tiles, her chores, her neatly organized shelves. The neighbors greeted her by name. Security waved her in without question. She knew when the grocery truck came, which neighbor liked to gossip, which gateman always asked for leftover food. Her presence threaded itself into the family's daily life so naturally that imagining the house without her felt uncomfortable. That level of comfort is dangerous, especially when it grows faster than the time it took to truly know who you hired. Looking back now, with that chilling footage still burned into her memory, the mother replayed those early days differently. Every smile, every nod, every moment of obedience twisted into something darker in hindsight. She realized how quickly she had opened the door to her home, her routines, her child, simply because exhaustion made her need outweigh her caution. And as that realization sank in, another question hit her like a slap. If the nanny could pretend so well for so long, then when, exactly, had the kindness ended and the performance begun? The first unsettling moment came quietly, slipping into her awareness the way a cold draft enters a room, soft enough to ignore, sharp enough to feel. She walked into the nursery one afternoon and sensed a strange stiffness in the air, the kind that makes your shoulders tense without reason. The baby's blanket was folded too tightly, the toys arranged too perfectly, and the nanny stood unusually still beside the crib. Nothing was wrong, but everything felt wrong. She forced a smile and stepped back out, pretending the discomfort didn't cling to her skin like something trying to warn her. Later that week, she noticed a small bruise on her baby's arm, round, faint, almost harmless in appearance. The nanny claimed it came from the stroller buckle, a quick explanation delivered with steady hands and calm eyes. The mother nodded, pretending to accept it, but something twisted deep in her chest. Babies bruise easily, she reminded herself. She had heard that countless times. Yet the shape lingered in her mind, replaying like a slow echo. If the explanation was so simple, why did it feel like the bruise carried a story no one was admitting? A few days later, she reached for her baby and felt the child cling desperately, tiny fingers digging into her shirt, as if terrified of being released. The nanny watched from across the room, that calm expression fixed in place like a mask. The mother tried to shrug it off. Maybe the baby was hungry, overstimulated, tired. But the trembling in those little hands felt different. It felt like fear, quiet and pleading. She swallowed hard, pressing her cheek to her child's head, pretending not to feel the storm of doubt rising inside her. The next hint arrived through silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, unsettling hush that takes over when a house is holding its breath. She stepped into the living room and heard nothing, not even the usual coos or soft babbles. The nanny sat too upright, eyes glued to her phone, barely reacting to the mother's arrival. The baby lay motionless on the mat, awake but oddly quiet. Something about the stillness gnawed at her. Babies didn't quiet themselves like that. Something or someone quieted them, and that realization made her pulse throb with unease. Another day, she found a toy snapped in half, one she knew her baby wasn't strong enough to break. It lay abandoned near the wall, its two jagged sides facing upward like evidence of a moment she never witnessed. When she asked casually, the nanny shrugged and blamed it on wear and tear. But the toy was new. She had unpacked it herself. A chill crept through her as she placed the broken pieces together, realizing how easily small eyes could bury themselves inside a home that trusted too much and questioned too little. One evening, she walked past the hallway and caught the nanny whispering sharply under her breath, a tone she had never heard in her presence before. The baby's soft cry followed, fragile and anxious. She froze mid-step, leaning closer to catch more, but the sound shifted instantly into a gentle hum. Too gentle, too sudden. The mother retreated slowly, her heart thudding against her ribs. She wanted to believe it was her imagination, but instincts don't invent danger. They detect it before logic can understand it. And something inside her whispered that this danger lived closer than she thought. By the time the unease grew heavy enough to interrupt her sleep, she found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every strange moment. Every bruise, every silence, every uneasy feeling she pushed aside in the name of trust and exhaustion. She tried convincing herself she was overreacting, that motherhood made everything feel dramatic. But deep down, a quiet truth tightened around her heart. Instincts don't scream unless something is truly wrong. And if her instincts were right, then the real question wasn't what had happened, but what was still happening when she wasn't looking. A soft afternoon sun spilled across the living room floor, painting warm streaks over the playmat, yet the warmth did nothing to calm the strange tightness building in her chest. She watched from the kitchen doorway as the nanny lifted the baby, her movements precise but lacking softness. The baby's whimper floated through the quiet room, thin and uneasy. The mother stepped forward slightly, unsure whether to intervene or observe. Her heartbeat quickened, clashing with the stillness around her. It felt like love pulling her forward and fear holding her back, both demanding she pay closer attention. The nanny placed the baby down a little too quickly, the sound of tiny hands hitting the mat sharper than it should have been. The mother winced, her breath catching in her throat. She waited for an apology or even a glance of concern, but the nanny simply straightened the baby's shirt and walked away as if the moment held no meaning. The child's lips trembled, eyes watering, tiny fingers trembling as they reached for comfort. Instinct tugged at the mother, urging her to run forward, yet something about the nanny's cold composure rooted her in place. Later that evening, she noticed how the nanny carried the baby differently when she thought no one was watching. The gentle sway she showed the mother disappeared, replaced by a rigid grip that looked more functional than affectionate. The baby squirmed, not in playfulness, but in discomfort, tiny feet pushing against the nanny's torso, as if trying to create space. The mother stepped into the room, and instantly, the nanny's posture softened, a fake tenderness washing over her features. That flicker of change hit the mother hard. Anyone can pretend, but only when they think no eyes are on them. The living room became a silent battleground for intuition. Every time the nanny reached for the child, the mother watched closely, searching for the smallest shift in expression or tone. She noticed the nanny sighing with irritation when the baby spilled milk, the tension in her jaw when the baby cried too long, the forced smile she gave whenever the mother appeared unexpectedly. Each small detail added weight to the growing fear pressing against the mother's ribs. Love made her stay near. Fear made her question everything she thought she understood about the woman she hired. One afternoon, she sat on the couch pretending to scroll through her phone while observing the nanny from the corner of her eye. The nanny bounced the baby half-heartedly, eyes fixed on another notification rather than the child in her arms. The baby's little face scrunched, lips quivering before letting out a soft, helpless cry. Instead of soothing the child, the nanny rolled her eyes slightly, a gesture so quick most people might miss it, but a mother doesn't miss anything that concerns her child. The mother's chest tightened. That tiny gesture screamed louder than any physical act. She began keeping the baby closer during her own presence, almost as if shielding the child from a storm no one else could see. The nanny's eyes followed them sometimes, calculating, unreadable, like someone frustrated at losing control of something they believed they had mastered. The mother started noticing how those eyes shifted when the father was home or when guests visited, slipping into a performance of perfect service. That duality sent chills crawling across her skin. It wasn't just what the nanny did. It was the confidence she had in hiding it that terrified her most. By the end of the week, love and fear had merged into one overwhelming truth. Something inside her home had changed. Something subtle yet dangerous. Something she could no longer push aside. She found herself lingering in doorways, pretending to tidy surfaces just to observe. Every cry from her child now carried a question. Every minute she stepped away felt like a risk. She didn't have proof, not yet, but she had enough unease to keep her awake at night. And deep down she knew this wasn't paranoia. It was preparation for a truth she was terrified to uncover. The decision to check the hidden camera came suddenly, almost impulsively, as if some unseen force nudged her hand toward her phone. She opened the app with a flick of her thumb, expecting nothing more than the usual slow footage of naps and feedings. But the moment the screen illuminated, her breath stilled in her throat. The timestamp showed a moment she wasn't home, a moment she assumed everything had been peaceful. A cold heaviness settled in her stomach as she tapped play, unaware that this single decision would fracture her sense of safety forever. The footage began with a nanny pacing the living room, holding the baby with a stiffness that sent a shiver down the mother's spine. There was no warmth, no softness, just impatience woven into every motion. The baby's small arms flailed helplessly, the cry muffled by distance yet unmistakable in tone. The nanny glanced toward the hallway, checking if anyone was near, then tightened her grip in a way that made the mother's fingers go numb. She leaned closer to the screen as if proximity could soften the horror forming in her chest, but it didn't. The nanny lowered the baby onto the playmat, not with care, but with a jarring drop that made the mother's entire body flinch. The baby whimpered, rolling slightly from the force, tiny limbs trembling with confusion. The nanny didn't comfort or soothe. Instead, she stood over the child with a cold expression the mother had never seen before, an expression that didn't belong anywhere near innocence. The mother's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp as tears gathered without warning. This wasn't a mistake in handling. This was something darker, something intentional. Then came the moment that stole her breath. The nanny leaned down, her face close to the baby's, and whispered something with a glare sharp enough to pierce through the grainy recording. The baby's cry intensified, shifting from discomfort to fear, a sound that clawed straight into the mother's heart. Instead of offering comfort, the nanny responded with a rough shove that forced the baby onto their back. The mother's legs weakened as the room around her faded. She had never imagined seeing cruelty directed at her child, especially not from the person she trusted most. She replayed the clip, hoping the angle distorted the motion or the lighting exaggerated the expression. But with each replay, the truth grew sharper, undeniable, merciless. The nanny's movements were too practiced to be accidental, too controlled to be frustration. The baby's fear wasn't imagined. It was visible in every trembling limb. The mother felt heat rising behind her eyes, anger mixing with terror in a way that made her chest ache. She paused the recording, her hands shaking violently, knowing that what she'd just seen wasn't the full story, only the beginning. Her eyes darted to the timeline, scanning for more activity, desperate to understand how deep the betrayal went. She tapped another clip, this one recorded only minutes later, her heart pounding as the nanny reappeared with a colder expression than before. The mother leaned closer, bracing herself, but nothing could prepare her for what she saw. The nanny snatching a bottle from the baby's reach with unnecessary force, her actions radiating irritation rather than care. The baby's startled cry echoed through the speakers, stabbing the mother with guilt for not discovering this sooner. By the time she stopped the video, her entire body vibrated with a fear she couldn't contain. The footage felt like a door swinging open to a reality she had refused to acknowledge, a reality where danger lived inside her home, disguised as help. She pressed the phone to her chest, trying to steady her breath as the walls closed in around her. The truth had finally revealed its face, and it was far uglier than she imagined. But one terrifying thought rose above the rest, tightening like a fist around her heart. If this was only the first clip, what horror waited in the next one? She sat frozen on the couch, the first video still echoing in her bones, yet something irresistible pushed her back to the app. Fear tried to hold her hand still, but instinct forced her thumb forward, tapping the next clip on the timeline. The screen brightened again, filling the room with a cold glow that felt nothing like daylight. She swallowed hard as the footage loaded, her heart tapping out a frantic rhythm against her ribcage. If the first video cracked her world, something inside whispered that this one might shatter it completely. The nanny entered the frame with a different energy. No longer impatient, but visibly irritated, like someone losing the last thread of self-control. She dropped her bag on the sofa with a thud and paced the room with a restlessness that unsettled the mother instantly. The baby sat quietly on the blanket, unaware of the storm brewing above. The nanny looked at the child with a tightening jaw, the kind of look that shouldn't exist in a home built on tenderness. The mother leaned closer, feeling her chest tighten as the atmosphere on screen shifted from discomfort to danger. Without warning, the nanny snatched the baby's toy and tossed it aside with force, as if punishing it for existing. The baby flinched, eyes widening, tiny fingers trembling in confusion. The nanny responded with a glare so sharp it made the mother's stomach churn. She watched in horror as the nanny leaned down, her movements slow but intentional, her hand pressing firmly against the mat near the child's head. It wasn't an act of care. It was intimidation. The mother's breath hitched as realization seeped in. This wasn't a moment of frustration. This was control. The nanny lifted the baby into her arms, but not like a caretaker, not like someone offering comfort. Her grip tightened too much, pulling the child close with an aggression that made the mother's stomach twist violently. The baby whimpered helplessly, their head tilting awkwardly as the nanny jerked them into position. The mother felt her vision blur as rage, fear, and disbelief collided inside her. She dug her nails into her palm, wishing she could reach through the screen, wishing she could stop the scene unfolding in front of her. But the video kept playing, and it only got worse. The nanny moved toward the couch, sat heavily, and bounced the child on her knee with jarring force, rhythmic, harsh, mechanical. The baby's cries escalated into sharp, panicked wails, echoing through the speakers with a pain that cut straight through the mother's chest. The nanny's expression didn't soften. Instead, her eyes hardened, lips pressed into a thin, cold line. Then, in a moment that made the mother's blood run cold, the nanny leaned closer and hissed something. Silent on the recording but unmistakably venomous in intention. The baby's cry broke into a sob. The mother felt something inside her snap. She slammed pause on the screen, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her breathing grew unsteady as the enormity of what she had witnessed settled over her like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just mishandling. This wasn't just impatience. This was a pattern. A deliberate, escalating cruelty directed at the smallest, most defenseless person in her home. She stared at the frozen image, the nanny's cold stare, the baby's tear-streaked face, and felt her heart fracture in a way she had never experienced before. Denial was no longer an option. The danger was real, present, inside her house. Tears blurred her vision as she dropped the phone onto the couch, her body folding in on itself like it had finally lost its strength. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe through the waves of horror crashing over her, but nothing steadied the storm inside. She now understood that this wasn't a single moment of cruelty. It was a window into something deeper, darker, long hidden. And as she sat trembling, one chilling truth carved itself into her mind. If this was what happened when the nanny thought no one was watching, what happened on the days she never checked at all? She woke the next morning with swollen eyes and a heaviness in her chest that felt almost physical, like grief pressing down on her ribs. But beneath that grief was something sharper, curiosity mixed with dread. She needed to understand who she had let into her home. So she began digging, starting with the nanny's references, the ones she barely checked months ago when exhaustion clouded her judgment. One number rang endlessly without answer. Another disconnected. And the last one, the one that once reassured her, belonged not to a former employer but to a woman who sounded startled to hear her name. As she scrolled through the nanny's social media accounts, she noticed something that hadn't struck her before. The timeline was too clean, too curated. There were no family pictures.
No childhood memories.
No friends commenting things like "long time" or "remember when." It was as if the nanny had constructed an identity from scraps. New photos, new locations, new stories, like someone building a shell to hide inside. The mother's stomach tightened with unease. People erase their pasts for a reason. And usually, it's not a harmless one. That afternoon, she overheard the nanny on a call, whispering harshly on the balcony, voice low, words clipped with irritation. She moved closer, the air thick with suspicion, catching snippets that made her blood chill. Phrases like "they don't suspect" and "I just need a little more time" slithered through the wind, each one carving deeper into the mother's fear. The nanny hung up quickly when she sensed movement. She returned inside wearing the same practiced smile, the same calm expression, but now the mother saw something behind her eyes, something calculated, something dangerous. Later, while cleaning the guest room, she found something she wasn't supposed to see. The nanny's small box tucked beneath the bed. Inside were items that made her heart stumble. Baby clothes that weren't theirs, a photograph of a child she had never seen, and a folded note scribbled with angry, chaotic handwriting. The words made her breath catch. Not again. Never again. Confusion and fear tangled in her chest as she tried to piece the meaning together. It felt like stepping into someone's haunted memory, and none of it belonged in her home. She dug deeper into the nanny's past, reaching out to local groups, neighbors, anyone who might have known her before. Piece by piece, a troubling picture emerged. Whispers of a previous job that ended abruptly. A child who suffered unexplained bruises. A family who moved away without warning. Each detail struck the mother like a blow, confirming her worst fear. The cruelty she witnessed wasn't new. It was a pattern, a repeated story. A storm the nanny carried with her from house to house, masked with sweetness until the cracks began to show. When the nanny returned home that evening, she carried herself with the same composed grace, setting down her bag and greeting the baby with a smile that now looked like a lie stretched across her face. The mother watched her closely, every gesture, every blink, every shift in tone.
She saw through the performance now.
She recognized the duality. The charm used to disarm, the calm used to manipulate, the silence used to conceal. And with that clarity came a rising fear. The nanny wasn't just hiding something. She was protecting something she didn't want anyone to uncover. That night, as the mother lay awake staring at the ceiling, the truth finally settled into place with chilling certainty. The nanny had not entered their home seeking work. She had entered seeking control. Her history, her secrets, her hollow identity. None of it pointed to innocence. They pointed to a woman running from a past filled with damage she never healed, patterns she never broke. And now, the mother realized with a sinking, breathless dread, her family had become part of that pattern. But fear wouldn't paralyze her anymore. Knowledge had turned into fuel, and she knew exactly what she had to do next. Night settled over the house like a heavy blanket, pressing shadows into every corner, yet none felt darker than the ones inside her chest. She paced the hallway with slow, trembling steps, replaying the videos in her mind until each frame felt carved into her bones. Every instinct in her body screamed for confrontation. She could feel the heat rising in her blood, the urge to storm into the nanny's room and unleash every ounce of rage she had swallowed. But rage without strategy is chaos, and chaos could put her child in more danger. So she forced herself to breathe. She paused outside the nursery door, listening. The soft hum of the air conditioner blended with the faint sound of her baby sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm forming around him. The nanny had put him down earlier, with that same practiced gentleness she performed whenever eyes were watching. The mother felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. She had watched enough footage to know that gentleness was an act, a performance, a mask worn for convenience. With each breath, the urge to confront grew sharper, slicing through the thin thread of restraint she clung to. She moved toward the nanny's room, the wooden floor creaking beneath her feet like a reminder not to take another step. But she ignored it. Tonight, silence felt like suffocation. She reached the doorway and saw a sliver of warm light escaping from beneath the door. Her pulse surged. The nanny was awake and moving. A shadow passed across the gap, slow and deliberate, as though she were pacing. The mother leaned closer, every nerve alert. Was she planning something? Hiding something? Or was she simply restless? The possibilities twisted into a knot inside her stomach. She lifted her hand to knock, just once, sharp and decisive, but her fingers froze midair. A sudden thought held her still. If she confronted the nanny now, unprepared, she risked alerting her. And alerting her meant giving her time. Time to destroy evidence. Time to twist stories. Time to flip the narrative. Worse, time to harm the child out of panic or spite. The mother lowered her hand slowly, breath shaking. Confrontation wasn't just an emotional decision, it was a strategic one. And tonight, every instinct told her the timing wasn't safe. Still, she lingered by the door, battling the war inside her. She imagined the nanny opening it, her expression tightening in confusion, her lies flowing easily like a well-practiced stream. She imagined losing control, shouting accusations she hadn't fully prepared to defend. She imagined the child waking in fear. Every version of confrontation spiraled into chaos. And yet, doing nothing felt unbearable. She pressed her forehead against the wall, feeling the cool paint steady her trembling thoughts. Sometimes survival wasn't about fighting immediately, it was about choosing the right moment to strike. Just as she stepped back to leave, the nanny's door clicked open slightly, a sliver of movement slicing through the hallway silence. The mother froze, heart thundering in her chest. She saw the nanny's silhouette pause, listening, sensing something unseen. The nanny's head tilted, as if sniffing for tension in the air. For a moment, they stood inches apart with only a door separating them, one holding secrets, the other holding truth. The mother held her breath, terrified the nanny would pull the door wider and catch her standing there. Instead, the nanny quietly shut it again. The mother stepped away on shaking legs, pulse rattling through her like a trapped bird. That near encounter carved one truth into her heart. The nanny was alert, unpredictable, and far more calculating than she realized. Confrontation wasn't just dangerous, it was reckless. She needed evidence, allies, and a plan strong enough to expose the truth without giving the nanny a chance to escape or retaliate. As she retreated to her room, fear melted into resolve. The night had almost broken her, but instead, it sharpened her. Tomorrow, she would begin preparing for the storm she knew was coming. Morning light crept into the house, soft and innocent, but she woke with a different kind of clarity, sharp, cold, and deliberate. Fear had kept her paralyzed, but now it fueled her purpose. She moved quietly through the living room, phone in hand, replaying every second of footage with a new kind of precision. She screenshot frames, saved clips, and backed everything up in hidden folders. With every digital file she secured, a piece of her trembling fear hardened into strength. This wasn't just a mother reacting anymore. This was a mother preparing for war she could no longer avoid. She studied the nanny's patterns, when she grew irritated, how she reacted during long cries, the moments she thought the house was empty. She noticed details she missed before, how the nanny always glanced around before acting harshly, how she stiffened when the baby laughed too loudly, how her smile dropped instantly when the mother turned her back. Each observation layered itself into a disturbing portrait of a woman who didn't lose patience accidentally. She orchestrated her cruelty strategically. And with each realization, the mother's resolve tightened like a fist. She needed undeniable proof, not just instinct. She downloaded a second security app, one that tracked motion more aggressively, capturing even the smallest changes in the room. She repositioned the camera angles during a brief moment when the nanny stepped out, adjusting them just enough to catch blind spots she hadn't considered. As she screwed the tiny device back into place, her hands steadied. For the first time in weeks, control edged its way back into her fingers. She didn't know how much time she had before the nanny's patience snapped again, but she intended to capture every moment that would expose her truth. Later, she called her closest friend under the guise of casual conversation, slipping coded messages into their chat about needing advice and feeling uneasy at home. Her friend picked up on the tremor beneath her words and urged her to document everything carefully. The mother nodded to herself, grateful for even this subtle form of support. Fear still lingered, but now it shared space with something stronger, community, even if distant. She wasn't ready to reveal the full horror of what she'd seen, but she knew she wouldn't face this alone when the moment came. Throughout the day, she watched the nanny closely, observing small cracks in her performance. The nanny's smile seemed tighter, her movements more clipped, her patience thinner than paper. It was as if she sensed the shift in the air but couldn't identify its source. At one point, she glanced directly at the hidden camera. Too quickly for suspicion, but enough to send a chill through the mother's spine. The mother forced herself to stay calm, to maintain the illusion of ignorance. Panic now could ruin everything. She needed the nanny to believe the game was still hers to play. By evening, the mother compiled everything into a secure folder labeled innocently on her laptop. Each clip represented a piece of truth, each file a weapon forged from pain. She tested the audio, amplified the visuals, and wrote down timestamps of the worst moments. The process drained her emotionally, yet it also stitched fragments of courage back into place. She realized the truth wasn't just in the footage, It was in her transformation. She was no longer a woman doubting her instincts. She was a mother documenting the threat living under her own roof. As she closed her laptop, night settled around her like a silent warning. The storm she'd been avoiding was now unavoidable, pressing against the edges of her reality. But this time, she wasn't the woman trembling in doorways or second-guessing her intuition. She had evidence, awareness, and a rising fire in her chest that felt impossible to extinguish. She knew the next step was risky, confrontation, exposure, or intervention, but she also knew something else. The nanny's reign inside her home was nearing its end. And when the truth finally hit daylight, someone's life would break open forever. The front door clicked open that evening with the same familiar sound, but today it felt like a trigger pulled inside her chest. She stood in the living room pretending to straighten the baby's toys, while her heartbeat rattled against her ribs like something trying to escape. The nanny stepped in, her expression calm and practiced, wiping her shoes on the mat before offering the same polite smile she wore every day. But now, the mother saw it clearly, the mask, the manipulation, the performance. Betrayal had entered her home many times before. This was simply the first time she recognized it. The nanny's eyes scanned the room in that casual, assessing way she always used, but today the mother noticed something new: wariness. A tiny flicker of tension in her jaw. A brief pause before she set her bag down. It was enough to confirm what the mother already knew. The nanny sensed a shift. She felt watched, exposed. The mother kept her breathing steady, her movements slow, hiding the storm in her chest. She needed the nanny calm, predictable, unaware of the evidence lying neatly stored in her laptop like a net waiting to be pulled tight. She watched the nanny lift the baby with a disturbing tenderness that felt too intentional, too rehearsed, like someone trying to rewrite a truth they feared was unraveling. The mother stepped closer, studying every detail. The nanny's smile stretched too wide, her voice pitched too sweet, her hands suddenly gentle after weeks of roughness. It was a performance meant to erase suspicion, a performance meant to manipulate. But the mother was done being fooled. She felt her muscles stiffen, her instinct roaring louder than ever. She wondered if the nanny could feel the shift of power hanging in the air. As the nanny moved toward the kitchen, the mother stepped into her path, forcing their eyes to meet. The nanny froze, her expression flickering, not with guilt, but with calculation. It was the first crack in her mask. She murmured something polite, trying to step around, but the mother didn't move. Beneath that stillness lived a silent challenge neither woman acknowledged aloud. The baby shifted in the nanny's arms, sensing the tension thickening around them. The mother clenched her jaw, fighting the urge to snatch her child immediately. But timing mattered now. One wrong move could unravel everything. She walked behind the nanny, staying just close enough to observe the tremor in her hands, a tremor so small a stranger would miss it, but a mother wouldn't. The nanny placed the baby in the high chair with unusual care, as if terrified of exposing her real habits. The mother watched silently, her presence heavy, unblinking. Every move the nanny made was deliberate, guarded, almost fearful. The balance of control had shifted, and the nanny felt it. But fear makes people unpredictable, and unpredictability is dangerous. The mother could feel the air tightening, waiting for something to break. When the nanny finally turned to leave the kitchen, the mother stood blocking the doorway again, arms crossed, not in aggression, but with an unmistakable authority she had not possessed before. The nanny's eyes flickered to the hallway, to the front door, to the camera in the corner, as if mapping escape routes. Her breathing changed. Her composure thinned. And for the first time, the mother saw something raw beneath the surface. Not remorse, not fear of consequences, but fear of exposure. That truth ignited something fierce inside her. The nanny knew she'd been discovered. She just didn't know how much. Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight, ready to snap. The mother leaned in just slightly, letting the weight of her stare do what words could not. The nanny swallowed hard, her face draining of color, understanding without hearing a single accusation. Betrayal had finally met its witness. Without saying a word, the mother stepped aside and let the nanny pass. Not as surrender, but as strategy. Because now, the mother held every card. And with every slow step the nanny took down the hallway, one truth pulsed through the mother's mind with blazing certainty. Tomorrow, this house will no longer belong to her. Morning arrived with a strange stillness, the kind that settles right before a storm breaks wide open. She held her baby close, feeling the soft warmth against her chest, the tiny breaths that reminded her exactly why she had to finish what she started. Every clip she saved, every timestamp she recorded, every sleepless night spent gathering evidence, it all led to this moment. She dialed the number with trembling fingers, her voice steady only because the child in her arms deserved nothing less. Today wasn't about anger anymore. Today was about protection, accountability, and justice. Authorities arrived quietly, stepping into the home with calm efficiency, their presence filling the room with a sense of structure she had been missing for weeks. She guided them to the laptop, her hands cold but steady as she opened the folder labeled innocently, hiding the truth within. The investigators leaned closer, faces tightening as the footage played. The grainy images captured more than cruelty. They captured intent, obsession, the quiet violence of someone hiding behind gentleness. The mother stood back, watching their reactions, knowing she wasn't crazy, knowing her instincts had been right all along. When they asked to speak with the nanny, she felt her heart pulse hard against her ribs. The nanny emerged from the hallway with the same calm expression she always wore, but something about her eyes twitched, an almost imperceptible flicker of panic. She scanned the room, noticing the officers, the open laptop, the mother's rigid posture. The mask she'd worn for months began to crack, thin lines of fear spreading across her face. She stammered a question, the words shaky. But this time, the mother didn't tremble. This time, she stood firm. The balance had finally tipped. As the investigators explained why they were there, the nanny's composure collapsed. Her breathing quickened, her fingers fidgeted uncontrollably, her eyes darting to the front door as if escape were still possible. But the truth had cornered her. She muttered excuses, then denials, then silence, when the footage replayed in front of her. The room felt colder as her facade dissolved completely, revealing someone far darker than the woman who once rocked the baby to sleep. And for the first time, the mother wasn't afraid of her, she was simply done with her. The baby let out a soft cry, sensing the tension swirling through the air. The mother lifted him gently, holding him close, feeling the small heartbeat pressed against her collarbone. That simple warmth grounded her more than any officer's presence. This wasn't just about exposing the nanny, it was about protecting her child's future, his safety, his sense of home. She watched the nanny being led toward the door, hands shaking, face pale, and felt a heaviness lift from her shoulders. Not relief, not yet, but possibility. This house was hers again. Her child was safe again. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as the nanny was escorted out, whispering in hushed, curious tones. The mother didn't care about the murmurs or the speculation. She cared about the way her child relaxed in her arms, about the steady rhythm of life slowly returning to their home. She returned inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, letting out a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for weeks. Justice wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, measured, and necessary. And it arrived exactly when her strength was finally ready to meet it. As she rocked her baby later that evening, the house felt lighter, safer, as if the walls themselves exhaled with her. She watched her child drift into peaceful sleep, his cheeks soft and relaxed without the tension she now recognized from before. He became more than her reason for fear. He became her symbol of victory. Every decision, every moment of doubt, every tear shed had led her to protect him in the way only a mother could. And as the room settled into calm, one truth echoed through her heart with undeniable clarity. He wasn't just the reason she fought. He was the reason she won. The house felt impossibly quiet in the days that followed, the kind of quiet that didn't creep with fear, but settled with relief. She moved through each room slowly, touching surfaces that once carried tension, listening to echoes that once hid danger. The baby's laughter returned, light and unhindered, filling corners of the home that had remained tense for too long. Every giggle felt like healing. Every nap felt like safety restored. And as she watched her child sleep peacefully in the soft afternoon light, she understood something deep. This peace wasn't accidental. It was earned through courage she never knew she had. She stood by the window, phone in hand, staring at the folder where the footage still lived. She could delete it now, erase the darkness, wash away the evidence of betrayal, but something inside her resisted. Not because she needed the reminder, but because other mothers might. Fear keeps people silent. Shame keeps them doubting. Instincts get smothered under the pressure to seem calm or grateful or trusting. She had lived that, drowned in it. And she knew too many women who might be living it right now, ignoring small signs in the name of politeness or exhaustion. That silence was dangerous. She opened the curtains wider, letting sunlight spill freely into the room, pushing shadows into corners where they no longer held power. The warmth touched her skin, uncoiling tightness from her shoulders. This home had survived something dark, something insidious that grew quietly behind routines and politeness. But the light was reclaiming it, inch by inch. As she breathed in the clean air, she realized her story wasn't just about fear or betrayal. It was about awakening, about recognizing the moment when love demands action, about learning that intuition isn't noise, it's guidance, a lifeline disguised as discomfort. She remembered the nights she doubted herself, the moments she convinced her own heart to stay quiet, the excuses she made to avoid sounding dramatic. And it struck her. The danger hadn't been the nanny alone. It had been the silence she forced upon herself. The silence society asks mothers to maintain. The silence that pretends exhaustion is enough reason to ignore intuition. She felt a quiet fire ignite inside her chest, not of anger, but of clarity. She would never silence instinct again. She would never shrink her awareness to make anyone comfortable, not when her child's safety was at stake. As the baby stirred softly in her arms, she pressed her cheek against his tiny forehead, feeling the warmth of a future she had fought fiercely to protect. He wouldn't remember the danger, the fear, or the nights she cried silently in his nursery doorway. But he would grow up in a home where truth wasn't ignored, where vigilance was love, where safety wasn't assumed but built. His life would not carry the shadows she banished. And in that realization, she felt something profound. The beginning of forgiveness. Not for the nanny, but for herself, for not knowing sooner. She walked through the doorway into the living room, the same space where she once watched betrayal unfold, and it no longer tightened her chest. Instead, it reminded her of her strength, her clarity, her transformation. This wasn't just the end of a crisis. It was the birth of a voice she hadn't allowed herself to use. The experience didn't break her. It sharpened her, strengthened her, rebuilt her into someone who understood the cost of ignoring warnings. Someone who knew the value of looking twice, listening longer, trusting deeper, but only when trust was earned, not assumed. As she held her child close, she realized this story wasn't hers alone. It belonged to every mother who ignored a whisper of discomfort, every woman who doubted her intuition, every parent who trusted too quickly or blamed themselves too deeply. She inhaled slowly, letting courage fill the spaces fear once lived in. Then she whispered a truth meant for every mother watching, not out loud, but in the quiet conviction of her heart. Never downplay what you feel. Never silence what scares you. And never forget that your child's safety begins with your voice. Because in the end, that voice isn't just protection, it's power.